Australia was never meant to rebel. It was meant to isolate, punish, and silence. When the British sent convicts to the edge of the world, they believed distance would destroy the human spirit. But something unexpected happened. The land didn't break them. It changed them. Escape attempts began almost immediately. Small groups vanished into the bush, learning from the land instead of fighting it. Every escape was a quiet revolution. No banners, no speeches. Just refusal. In the deep wilderness, authority lost its meaning. Chains rusted, orders faded. The bush didn't belong to the crown. It answered to no one. Men and women who were meant to disappear instead learned to survive. They followed rivers, read the stars, and trusted the land more than the empire that abandoned them. This was the first sign. Australia would not obey quietly. Control in Australia was never absolute. It only looked that way. Behind locked doors and guarded camps, something dangerous was growing. Hope convicts were not just surviving, they were organizing. Whispered plans passed from cell to cell. Trust formed where fear was meant to live. The guards had weapons, but the prisoners had nothing left to lose. In 1804, the silence broke. Armed convicts rose against British authority, believing freedom was worth any cost. It was chaotic. It was desperate. And it was unstoppable, if only for a moment. The rebellion was crushed. Leaders were executed. The empire declared order restored. But something had changed. For the first time, the crown had been openly challenged on Australian soil. Power was no longer unquestioned. Fear had crossed the line into defiance. Chains could restrain bodies. They could not restrain ideas. Australia had taken its next step toward revolution. Gold was meant to bring order. Instead, it lit a fire. When gold was discovered, the land filled with people who refused to bow. Miners arrived with nothing but hope and anger. The rules were cruel. Licenses were expensive. Soldiers enforced obedience with batons and guns. But the gold fields were not prisons. They were pressure points. Every tax felt like theft. Every raid felt like tyranny. And slowly, defiance spread from camp to camp. At Eureka, the miners drew a line. They raised a flag that did not belong to any empire. Under it, they swore loyalty not to a king, but to each other. They knew the cost. They stood anyway. The battle was short. The impact was permanent. Though the rebellion was crushed, the system cracked. Rights expanded. Voices were heard. Representation followed. Gold did not just enrich Australia. It awakened it. The revolution was no longer hidden. It was alive. Before ships arrived, resistance already existed. For over 60,000 years, Indigenous Australians lived with the land, not over it. When invasion came, it did not bring surrender. It brought the longest resistance in human history. There were no declarations, no single battlefield. Resistance moved through songlines, ceremonies, and survival. When land was taken, culture was protected. When voices were silenced, memory carried the truth forward. Fighters stood, leaders rose. Communities endured. Even when weapons were unequal, the will to remain never broke. Survival itself became defiance. Language became protest. Culture became rebellion. The land became a witness. This revolution did not end. It adapted. And it continues to shape Australia in ways few are taught to see. Australia was not built on obedience. It was built on refusal. Convicts refused to disappear. Workers refused injustice. Indigenous peoples refused erasure. Each act alone seemed small. Together, they formed a nation that questioned authority instead of worshipping it. A country shaped by quiet defiance rather than loud conquest. Australia's revolution was never a single moment. It was a pattern repeated across generations. When control tightened, resistance adapted. When voices were ignored, they grew stronger. This is the hidden adventure behind Australia's history, not a tale of loyalty to empire, but of people who chose survival, fairness, and freedom. The land remembers, and so does the nation. Australia's revolution didn't end in history books. It never truly ended at all. It lives in the land that refuses to be controlled, in voices that still question power, in a nation shaped by survival, not surrender. These were not heroes written by empire. They were ordinary people who refused to disappear. This is the Australia few are taught about. The Australia that endured, adapted, and resisted. And if you listen closely, the land is still telling its story. The hidden adventure continues.